Happy Friday the 13th, Mormons, ex-Mormons, and everyone else listening. I'm coming live on the Dodger Game channel right now. And today, I wanted to introduce prominent anti-Mormonism Mormon truthers, as I will call them. I don't want to call people anti-Mormons because most of these people are not against people in the church in general. They tend to be against the false doctrines, the contradictions, and the misleading characterizations that they get, actually, that we get from the top echelon of leadership in the church. I also want to introduce some people on the other side of the spectrum who are sharing their beliefs on Mormonism. Most of them are dishonest. However, top of the list here, before I get into our heavy-hitting anti-Mormonism cast here, I'm going to go right down the list here in my YouTube history. So I recently discovered Halle Everts, who's a young Mormon girl who is sharing her thoughts on Mormonism, trying to help people within the faith, and sharing her personal experience. And my take on her, after I've done a couple of review videos on her stuff, is that she's way too honest to stay Mormon for long. She's noticed some things that are wrong in the LDS culture, and hopefully my review video, which I send her a link to, will help her to realize that it comes from the top down. Anyway, let's take a quick peek there. Here she is, and she's talking about anything from the word of wisdom and what's screwed up about it to her thoughts on modesty and
on my mind for a long time, and I just have to talk about it. So today's video is going to be for non-Mormon people and Mormons. It's going to be all about church culture and clearing up some misconceptions people have about the Mormon church.
Well, she seems to think some of these things are misconceptions, and I disagreed with her there, but she's an honest girl. I like her, and I'll recommend her. Hey, she's got more views than me. What do I know, right? Of course, I've got probably more material on the internet than anybody else as far as YouTube videos. But Dan Vogel's got a lot more views. And Dan Vogel is top of my list here for Mormon researchers that have their own YouTube channel. Dan does really a tremendous job with his primary source investigation of Mormon history. So here we can, I'll jump into his channel. Dan's an author. He's written a lot of stuff maybe comparable to some of the things that we hear on Michael Quinn's investigations. Actually, I'm not into his thing there. I'm just looking at his video there, so that might screw up my whole history thing. I don't know. Dan Vogel, what's this one? Occult Context of Joseph Smith's 1823 Discovery of Gold Plates. And like I said, he's like an original. He's a source for material for anybody who is looking into documenting LDS history. So you want to learn about the seer stone stuff, he's a great source. Of course, I've done some pretty decent documenting on my early Mormonism and seer stones, but certain details, Dan Vogel in his books, he's good. He's really good. I think he's an atheist at this point. I'm not sure if he was ever LDS. I don't know everything about all these people. He's calm, cool, and collected, and discusses things in a scholarly manner, and highly recommended. All right, next I'm going to look at Flackerman. I chose this particular video here, Tactics of a Mormon Apologist, because that kind of leads into something else. That leads into Fair Mormon, the most unfair apologetics I have ever seen. Well, okay, Fair Mormon Farms is defunct out of BYU, and then we've got some of their people like Dan Peterson there, and here's Scott Gordon. And here, Flackerman, who does a lot of, he's covered almost every subject.
Another common tactic is
here he catches Scott Gordon, president of Fair Mormon, the biggest apologetics research. The biggest twisters of truth that I know is Fair Mormon. Outside, even more so than maybe than LDS. It's between them and LDS.org Gospel Topics Essays, and I think they share some of the same authors. So that video, Scott Gordon is busted being completely dishonest and using the character assassination techniques that are so characteristic of those who are defending the church, that are knowledgeable and are the apologetic arm of the church, whether officially or unofficially, using character assassination. Guys like Dan Peterson, Scott Gordon, and I don't know if Brian Hales gets into that so much, but I heavily disagree with what he has to say as he gets Joseph Smith off the hook, or tries to, with all his philandering. And I am not a Brian Hales fan. So those are your three main characters that I'm aware of that are with Fair Mormon. But Flackerman here, maybe I can get into his channel here. What do I have to do? Turn it up like this. And let's try going into his channel. And Flackerman's just got a lot of stuff. Go to videos. And he's not doing that much anymore, but he used to. He's really slowed down. He used to be a lot more prolific, and he covers a lot of subject matter and uses a script, and he does a really great job. So I recommend him. And he exposed Scott Gordon, so gotta love him for that. Okay. Coming right back to it here. Doing this live can be interesting. Alright, next, what do we have? Top 10 fallacies. Oh, that's Flackerman again. Top 10 fallacies of Mormonism. So he went right through things. His videos aren't super long. There was a 6-minute video. He's gotten shorter on them, actually, I think. But he's pretty concise. He doesn't go into these longer videos like Dan Vogel or me, or Self on the Shelf. But he's good. He's very good. Next, Self on the Shelf. So we got Samantha Snyder and Tanner. I hate to try his last name, so I don't want to massacre it, but I've taken snippets of their stuff to use in some of mine, because these guys are really intelligent, and some of them, they try to be funny. They don't try. They are successfully funny, and so they use parody, and they also write a lot on their is it a blog? They get into depth. They've done a lot of study, and what we find is most of the people that are doing these are pretty intelligent people. Yeah, I'm fairly intelligent, I think. Maybe I'm just a smart aleck. But they've done a lot of research too. A lot of it. Young people, funny. Let's just play a moment. I always love listening to these two. Alright, we're going to have to endure a commercial here. 3 seconds.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Mormon Forceman, a video series dedicated to promoting the standards of Mormonism by forcing everyone to use their agency wisely. I am, of course, Brynlee.
And I'm, of course, Ian.
Hi, Ian.
Hi, Bryn. Today we're going to be talking about the word of wisdom, and that we all have friends who have left the church, and it's always for the same reason: they wanted to sin. And the word of wisdom is one of the biggest, breaking the word of wisdom is one of the biggest sins out there.
So today we're going to be talking to you about a lot of the substances forbidden by the word of wisdom to help you protect your family.
And also help those people who have wrapped themselves in the flaxen cords of addiction.
Not in a sexy way.
No.
That's forbidden anyway.
Forbidden. That's a different episode.
Sadly, some people like their drinks like they like their afterlife, burning hot.
The word of wisdom specifically forbids hot drinks, and no drink is hotter than hot coffee.
Drinking coffee is literally like drinking Satan's urine. It might sound like a lot of fun, but it actually tastes like dirty water from Bangladesh, filtered through a Walmart dumpster, and then poured onto a sun-baked possum carcass. And it will make you feel just the same.
Instead of selling your birthright for a boiling cup of outer darkness.
Okay, so they're pretty irresistible. Zelf on the shelf. There's a lot of wisdom to be had there, and some laughs as well. Okay, how we got me now? Now, how's the best way to get to me? To these other people, it was very easy just saying, you know, Zelf on the shelf, Flackerman, Dan Vogel. But for me, well, my YouTube handle is Dodger Game. If you just use Dodger Game, it's going to be all about the LA Dodgers baseball team, which has a whole lot to do with my handle there. But anyway, I've got a second channel, by the way, which is called Mormon Truth. However, since it's so oriented towards the subject but not unique, that's not the greatest way either. However, if you double up and say Dodger Game Mormon Truth, let's give that a try and see what happens. Dodger Game Mormon Truth. Network not connected, that's great. Well, I wonder how this is working. Fortunately, I did this earlier. Let's just hope that my broadcast is not getting wiped out because it says network not connected. Here we go, Mormon Truth Dodger Game. Coming up a little slow, but we've got 206 videos coming up, it says, under Dodger Game. Some of them should be Mormon Truth, but not many. There's only like 60 on there, and about, I don't think there's 206. Well, it says 206, for goodness sakes. Okay, so, yeah, I probably got the most material on the internet, on YouTube, and, am I boasting? Hey, maybe it's because I have no life. I've got a lot of experience in the church and done a lot of study, and we got a lot of subjects, but I'm not going to... Anyway. Some of my things are critiquing what other people have done or doing some reviews of Mormon Apologists. Here we've got 3 Mormons. We've got Kwaku, Ian, and in the middle in his lavender getup is Stephen Smoot, who works with Book of Mormon Central, and I recently did a video on Stephen's presentation, which was filled with deception. His video was, not mine. Only deception in mine is when Stephen opens his mouth. But, you know, it's from the Smoot family, pretty prominent, I think, in the church. And he doesn't seem to be averse to twisting things quite a bit, and so he's done that. Anyway, so I've covered just about every subject that I think is out there, almost, having to do with the church. Just kind of going through here so you can see a few things, whatever's just come up with that. And one of them was the CES letter. And I actually have done 7 episodes on that, and there are a few more to go if I choose to complete those, because I didn't get through the entire CES letter, and that's written by Jeremy Reynolds, who's going to be one of the people that we feature here. Although he doesn't do much on YouTube, his CES letter has been pretty big and drawn a lot of attention from the church. He was excommunicated over it for asking questions that were difficult and getting a lot of attention on it. So That's what happens to people that bring up issues in church history that are not faith promoting, whether or not they are true. Anyway, enough of me for a moment. Let's promote somebody else here. Oh, I wanted to de-promote Greg Trimble here pretty soon, but he's not so much into YouTube, but he's appeared on other people's YouTubes, including Three Mormons. And that one, they were just talking about atheists, and they had an atheist there who was ex-Mormon, and yeah, these guys treated him like he was a human being, unlike God is going to do, according to what we find in the scriptures. But yeah, so even Trimble and Quacku and Ian are likely to be more merciful if they were God to somebody who left the church. Amazing. Okay, so here we are back where we were. There's Zelf on the Shelf, and that was one of my videos. And so here's Jeremy Reynolds. So Jeremy did the CES letter, and he's being featured here on Mormon Stories, which is John DeLynne's project. One of his projects, his main or first or whatever, the one he's most known for, Mormon Stories. And he's interviewed like, what, I don't know, hundreds of people. He's got like 800 episodes, but a lot of them, they have, you know, a couple episodes, because they're so long, where people tell their stories. So Jeremy Reynolds was one of them, and he was a returned missionary who had questions like many of us did, but when he completed or got deeply into his study, he put together a letter for the director or a director of the church educational system. That's what CES stands for. So Jeremy's pretty famous for that, and many people have downloaded. This is such nice music on Mormon Stories introduction. So we'll get into his thing next. But anyway, the CES letter has been bashed and attacked, of course, because of its damage it's done to membership rosters in the church, because it's helped a lot of people to identify subjects that contradict the assertion that an all-knowing, unchanging, wise, holy, just, merciful God guides the church. So going from that, we've got Mormon Informant. And Mormon Informant, he doesn't do a lot of videos, but he put together a very successful video. Here you're looking at 334,000 views on his 50 Problems with the Mormon Church video. And I've done a whole bunch of videos detailing some of those
600-year-old humans, Jonah and the whale, people turning into salt, and carrying honeybees across the ocean.
So what he did in this particular video is he detailed
goats, elephants,
a whole bunch, at least 50 items that Jeremy brought up in the CES letter, and just stated what they were. It's a 9.5-minute video, so he doesn't get into detail on those. He's just concisely stated what certain of these issues are that are matters of concern. So I've gone into a lot of detail on, well, most of them, but I did a number of videos at the beginning of this year when I started doing the YouTube thing, detailing several at a time of these, or actually sometimes only one, and I stayed on the polygamy thing for like, I don't know, 7 videos, but I was doing like 15-minute videos at that point because of the YouTube limit. I hadn't figured out how to get beyond 15 minutes. So Mormon Informant seems to be pretty scholarly. It's a short video, but it's gotten a lot of attention. He gets a lot of comments on it, and you can tell by the way he articulates LDS history when he has discussions with people in the comments that he really knows his stuff. He's done a couple other short videos, but sharp guy, really sharp guy. Next. Introduction to the Gospel Topics Essays. That's Mormon Informant again. 13 minutes. And, okay. Next, what do we have? Mr. Deity. So this is Brian Keith Dalton. He's a Hollywood producer. John DeLynne's got him on Mormon Stories, apparently. And this looks like it's more like somewhere else. But Brian Keith Dalton.
Where? Can someone get that?
He's amazing.
You want me to get it? Can I get it? I would love to answer it. Whoever's calling, they better not step off a curb, you know, without looking both ways. That's all I'm going to say.
I'd like him to say something a little more profound than that, but that's just where I am there. I've actually used a couple clips of his. He's super articulate. Everything he does is really professional. His Mr. Deity thing between he and Lucy, his female Lucifer, it's hilarious at times, and it's really effective in getting across points. One of the favorite ones I've seen that they did. I guess they're acting like they're a married couple, and somehow they take in a guy who's, got amnesia or something. Turns out he's a Christian preacher or something, but he didn't. He's got amnesia, and so somehow they try to explain God to him, and it's, it's this invisible guy. No one's ever seen him, but he's talking about how society works and how religion works, and this guy's like, you got to be kidding me. And then someone comes to the door looking for him. He says, please don't tell him that I'm here, I don't want to be a preacher now. I can't believe I was actually supporting this kind of a thing. So, he's sharp, really worth watching, I think. And he articulates a lot of points that are clearly problematic with the assertion that an all-knowing and changing and really good guy, kind of a God, would be guiding the church or actually running the world. So, Brian Keith Dalton, Mr. Deity. Greg Trimble. Okay, so he appeared on the Three Mormons, so he's got a really successful blog. He's really into the blogging. And he, kind of rehashed Hugh Nibley's Book of Mormon challenge, which basically went on a false premise, saying if you can't prove how Joseph Smith came up with the Book of Mormon, content, then it must be true. That's maybe an oversimplification, but there are 10 specific points that he made there on his blog, and I thought they were pretty ridiculous. So I used about 4 videos to pretty much destroy any credibility that he ever had, because he said a lot of things that really didn't work well with fact. So, number 10 being that the Book of Mormon has no contradictions in it. And that's pretty hilarious. So, I took several videos to just, because I was into the 15-minute thing back then, to just go over so many contradictions that were just ridiculous and hilarious, which kind of leads me into somebody else, but that would be Sean McCraney, who does a fantastic job of that. He's, returned missionaries, Christian at this point. Most Mormons who get disillusioned with the church wind up probably becoming atheist, but Sean hasn't, and he does a tremendous job of articulating issues having to do with the church and the Book of Mormon and the zero credibility that it has, because he's able to discuss very well a lot of the contradictions in it and the fallacies that are in it, the false histories and anachronisms, and he does a really great job. Okay, so here we got two of the... Now here, who do we have? We got Ian and Smooty Boy. Book of Mormon Evidences. Yeah. So anyway, I just did one on Smoot recently. What they like to call evidence is... well, it doesn't work out too well generally. Anyway, watch my video on that one. recently done with Stephen Smoot and Book of Mormon Central. He used a lot of fancy talk to try to make it look like we've got Book of Mormon evidence, and that he asserted that it was incumbent upon those who disagree with the Book of Mormon being anything other than, 19th century fiction novel to prove it. Well, it is easily proven, but we don't have to prove how Joseph Smith came up with the material. All we've got to show is that it's packed with lies, and God says he's not a liar, and he obviously is, so it doesn't work out too well. Book of Mormon destroys itself, just like Joseph Smith destroyed his own credibility, even though people like Brian Hales try to twist things enough to make it look like it's okay to cheat on your wife a few hundred times. Okay, or try to make it look like he really wasn't. It was just dynastic as he was destroying other men's families, being sealed to, 11 guys' wives, many who were faithful LDS elders. Some of them were off on their missions when he seduced their wives. Or Brian Hales would say he didn't seduce them. He was just sealed to them. Of course, that was before the revelation, which he denied ever existed anyway, so it actually wasn't church doctrine. And it never said you could be sealed to some other person's wife. It only named virgins. So how they come up with this convoluted garbage to be sealed to other guys' wives is a little beyond my comprehension. So there we had, that was Fair Mormon guys, Brian Hales and the boys. They are famous for that. And so we're looking at Fair Mormon there. That's your biggest Mormon apologetics outlet. And of course the church has got their own stuff on LDS.org, where some of these same guys are misleading us in the Gospel Topics essays. Maybe I should talk about that right now. So I've done multiple videos on that, especially on the DNA and the race and priesthood, where they blatantly lie, where they say things and make statements basically for and in behalf of the first presidency, vicariously working through apologetic essay writers. Of course, they try to make it sound like it's fair and balanced essay rather than apologetics, which is completely one-sided, but they're even dishonest in that. So I've gone right through those essays, not all of them, but at least a couple, and the contradictions and the deceptions are blatant, and I think I've done a good job in illustrating that. So watch some of those, like race and truthfulness, or the DNA issues, or there's a good portion in the one called Awesome Anti-Mormons. Speak out on the fictional origins of the Book of Mormon. Yeah, that's the new name of it. The new name. The video's got a new name. It's been to the temple. It's been rehashed. Before that, it was called 33 Things You Got to Put on the Shelf in Order to Believe the Book of Mormon. So I just improved it a little bit. It's one of my most popular videos, actually. Okay, so Brother Jake. Let's watch a couple minutes of him. In 4 minutes, Brother Jake does parody, basically. In 4 minutes, you're wondering how you can possibly have ever, believed that this stuff made sense. So let's just check out a couple minutes. Brother Jake he's pretty awesome. Brother Jake explains prophets are awesome. I'm explaining that Brother Jake is awesome. I recommend him.
Hi, I'm Brother Jake. Now, there are some people out there that think that it's weird that Mormons have modern-day prophets, or that Mormon prophets aren't super inspired or speak directly to God, but that's just totally wrong. Let me explain. But first, I gotta talk about what exactly a prophet is. A prophet is an ultra-righteous dude that's chosen by God to tell everyone about what God's like and what God wants for us. But it's more than just like a regular old preacher or something because of two things. First, a prophet speaks directly to God, like face-to-face, so he can tell us what God wants us to do. And second, a prophet holds the priesthood. The super special, one-of-a-kind authority of God that lets people get legit baptisms and live with their families families after they die. But he doesn't just hold any old priesthood. He has the highest, most awesomest priesthood of anyone on earth. Because it's like this. The priesthood is all about keys, which are these things that let us use God's power for specific stuff, like a really cool permission slip. So like a bishop has keys to preside over his ward, and a stake president has keys for all the wards in his stake, but the prophet has all the keys to watch over and be in charge of the entire world. So in the past, Adam and Noah and Moses and all those other dudes leading up to Jesus were prophets. But it turns out that after Jesus and all of his apostles were killed, there weren't any other prophets or anything on earth, so the priesthood was lost and nobody could be saved. That's why stuff like the Dark Ages happened. But then in 1820, God and Jesus appeared to Joseph Smith and called him to be a modern-day prophet. And when he died, Brigham Young was called, and then John Taylor was called, and then some other guys were called, and ever since there's been a living prophet called by God on the earth. I mean, it's not like they're called out of the blue or anything. Nowadays, just the oldest surviving member of the highest governing body of the church becomes the new prophet, so we know exactly who it's going to be, but just because the succession pattern operates exactly as if it were like a corporation or something doesn't mean it's not inspired. Anyway, having a living prophet is a huge bonus because prophets can do some really awesome stuff, like talk to God and even reveal new scriptures. Like Joseph Smith, who translated golden plates through the power of God that became the Book of Mormon, and also did an inspired translation of the Bible and some writings of Abraham from some Egyptian scrolls to make another book of scripture called the Pearl of Great Price, and also dictated a bunch of revelations that became another book of scripture called the Doctrine and Covenants. And like Brigham Young, who added like a chapter, I think, and some other guys who added some stuff that kind of rolled back some of the stuff that Joseph Smith and Brigham Young had said. So yeah, the prophets nowadays don't really come out with new scriptures or even really claim to talk to God directly anymore, which might make you kind of wonder if they really have a special connection to God at all. But if you look at all the awesome stuff they do, like deciding to start building temples that were a little bit smaller than the ones we typically used to build, and lowering the minimum age you have to be to go on a mission, and overseeing and financing the construction of multi-million-dollar luxury malls, you can clearly see that they're still super inspired and not just driven by the bureaucratic necessities of running a giant institution at all. Oh, plus they give us semi-annual sermons to tell us about stuff that's bad, like fornication and communism and internet porn and gay marriage, and tell us how we should be nice to each other and not do drugs or drink alcohol or coffee, and to have food storage. I mean, who else is even talking about that stuff? Only a prophet could remember to tell us about that. But just because prophets are ultra-righteous and talk to God doesn't mean that they're more than just mortal men or that we worship them. I mean, sure, we do throw giant celebrations for their birthdays and have our pictures taken with them and ask for their autograph and think of it as a major life event when we meet them in person. But that's just showing honor and respect for their role, not worship. They're totally different. I mean, it's not like we sing hymns about them in church or anything. The thing is, they're just people doing their best to teach us about God's will. And sometimes, even though the entire reason they're called is to talk directly to God so that there's no ambiguity about what God thinks and wants us to do, they can sometimes screw up a tiny bit by going off script and spouting off a bunch of personal opinions that may or may not be right. Like, for example, when pretty much every modern-day prophet between 1850 and 1978 taught the entire membership of the church that black people were black because they did some not-so-great stuff before they were born, and then made a church-wide policy based on that idea so that generations of black church members couldn't hold the priesthood or go into our super special VIP temples so they couldn't get sealed to their families. But give those guys a break. Like I said, prophets are just people. They make mistakes. And yeah, it might seem a little weird to chalk up something like generations of prophetically endorsed institutionalized racism to human error and then go on believing that the prophets actually have a unique connection to the mind of God, especially when you think about the fact that their prophetic authority allowed them to perpetuate these erroneous ideas way more than they could have otherwise, which kind of seems to defeat the purpose of even having a prophet in the first place. But that's why it's so important to have a current prophet, because through things like conference talks or press releases or anonymously sourced articles on our church's website, current prophets can tell us when previous prophets were talking crazy and weren't actually teaching God's will. Now, you might be thinking, but if a current prophet can say that a past prophet was just making stuff up, even though the past prophet really thought it was the will of God at the time, how do we know that the current prophet isn't just making stuff up too? Because having a prophet isn't about him being right all the time about what God's will is, even though that's probably the most important reason for having a prophet at all. Because for God, following what the prophet says is about us showing him that we're willing to be obedient. So even if we feel a little uncomfortable about what the prophet says we should do or what opinions we should have, and even if we end up going down a path that isn't technically right or moral, it doesn't count as a sin, really, because we were just following God's other commandment to follow the prophet. So you see, prophets are awesome.
And there you have it, Brother Jake. Alrighty then. Next! So he's got a bunch of those.
Hi, I'm Brother Jake.
Oh,
now,
no.
Some of you might be wondering, hey, what's this Book of Mormon thing? Well, the Book of Mormon is another testament of Jesus Christ, just like the Bible, and it's full of uplifting stories that will bring you peace and happiness.
Let's
Let me
indulge.
summarize it for you. It all starts with this prophet named Lehi who was living in Jerusalem in like 600 BC. So he had this dream where God told him that Jerusalem was going to get the kibosh, and he and his family had to escape to a promised land. Now, he had these 4 sons named Laman, Lemuel, Sam, and Nephi. Sam was pretty cool, and Nephi was pretty much the strongest, most righteous dude ever. But Laman and Lemuel were these whining little jerks that always complained about everything and were constantly trying to kill Nephi. Nephi. So Lehi and his family went out into the wilderness with these brass plates that were like a book with all the commandments written on them, which, by the way, Nephi had gotten by finding the guy who owned them passed out drunk and God telling Nephi to kill that guy because it was better for that guy to get his head cut off than for Lehi's whole crew to be spiritually screwed by having no scriptures with them. Anyway, while they were in the wilderness, Nephi had this dream where he saw the promised land that his family was going to later get discovered by a Gentile who sailed across the ocean blue, and then colonized by people fleeing religious persecution, and then the colonies break away from the motherland, set up a land of liberty. So you can probably guess where the promised land was. Anyway, so they build a boat and sail from the Middle East all the way to America. Then Lehi dies, and Laman and Lemuel split off with their own people and set up their own civilization. So there's two groups of people, the Nephites, who are all the good people, and the Lamanites, who are all the bad people. And since the Lamanites were so lazy and bloodthirsty, God put a curse on them so their skin turned dark, and the Nephites would know not to intermarry with them. Anyway, eventually Nephi dies, and Jacob, his righteous younger brother, who was born while they were in the wilderness, becomes the prophet. But he kind of had a rough time with it, because the Nephites were always going off the rails, and he was constantly having to tell them how they should be nice to each other and only have one wife, unless God says it's okay to have more. So anyway, like 300 years later, the Nephites have this king named Benjamin, and right at the end of his life, he builds this tower and makes this awesome speech about how Jesus is going to come, and how they all needed to recognize how tiny and insignificant before God they were, and they should just get off their behinds and repent, and they totally did. So then King Benjamin dies, and his son Mosiah becomes the new king. So Mosiah was thinking, hey, whatever happened to those people in that land of Lehi Nephi place? Oh, shoot, I almost forgot. Okay, back up a second. So when Mosiah was king, but not this Mosiah, I mean his grandpa, King Benjamin's dad, who was also named Mosiah, the Nephites had to escape from the Lamanites, and while they were running off to a new place, the Nephites discovered this whole other city that was filled with these other people that spoke another language. And after they all got on the same page language-wise, they found out that these other people were descendants of Mulek, who was the only surviving son of Zedekiah, who was the last king of Judah before the Israelites were conquered by the Babylonians. And the Mulekites escaped when the Israelites were taken captive and also built a boat and also sailed from the Middle East all the way to America to live. Oh, and it turns out the Mulekites had discovered some other people called the Jaredites, who lived way before the Nephites or Mulekites and sailed from the Middle East to America right after the whole Tower of Babel fiasco in these almond-shaped, totally sealed submarines that were propelled by the wind even though they had no sail, using special rocks that shone all the time because they had been touched by the finger of Jesus as a light source. Anyway, after they got here, the Jaredites created a huge civilization that eventually imploded in a civil war where millions died in the final battle until there was only like one guy left who was discovered by the Mulekites way later. Anyway, eventually the Mulekites decided to join up with the Nephites in this place called Zarahemla, but then some of the Nephites were like, we can't just let the Lamanites take over the motherland, and some of them went back to the land of Lehi Nephi where the Nephites ran away from with the first Mosiah. So then later the other Mosiah sent some dudes to check if those guys were okay. Well, it turns out they weren't doing so great since they had become enslaved by the lazy, idolatrous Lamanites, but the Nephites Mosiah had sent helped the Mulekites escape by getting all the Lamanite guards wasted on extra strong wine and sneaking the population of an entire city out the front gate while the Lamanites were passed out. See how bad drinking booze is? Anyway, then they all went back to Mosiah, and the whole monarchy was disbanded for a system of democratically elected judges. So later on, this prophet named Alma teamed up with this other guy named Amulek, and they became like this missionary dream team. Like one time they got thrown in prison, and all the people that believed what they taught got burned in a bonfire, even though Alma and Amulek could have saved them, but they didn't because God wanted to make sure the people that were burning them would go to hell for doing it. Oh, and then there was this other guy named Ammon who went to go preach to the Lamanites, and they took him prisoner, but he told them that he just wanted to like help him out, so he became one of the king's servants. Anyway, eventually he protected the king's flock of sheep by chopping off the arms of all the people that were trying to steal it and taking the severed arms back to the king. And the Lamanite king was so impressed with Ammon's dismembering skills that he asked Ammon to share his message of peace and love, and later his entire kingdom converted to Christianity and became friends with the Nephites and called themselves the Anti-Nephi Lehites, which might sound confusing but basically means good guys. But then this bad guy named Amalickiah decides that the whole democracy thing really isn't for him and that he should be king, but before he can become king, this military leader named Captain Moroni, who's pretty much a mix between Chuck Norris and Moses, rips off his shirt and writes basically a pre-Columbian American version of the Declaration of Independence on it. So the bad guy runs off to the Lamanites and becomes the king there and starts a huge war, but with the help of these 2,000 anti-Nephi Lehi teenagers that had so much faith that they couldn't be killed, the Nephites eventually win and get things back on track. Well, kind of, because like almost immediately after the war, the Nephites and Lamanites get attacked by this group called the Gadian robbers, who are basically like the Incan mafia. So the good Lamanites and the Nephites band together against the thugs, at which point the good Lamanites turn back white again and beat those guys down. Then bam, all these crazy natural disasters hit and cover the land of darkness for 3 days, during which the voice of Christ speaks to all the survivors and explains that all those disasters were signs of his death, and that all the cities that were completely annihilated, along with all the people in them by floods and fires and earthquakes and landslides, got wiped out because every single one of the people in them were bad and deserved to die, and all the people that were alive survived because they were more righteous than the people who had died. Then, after a little while, Jesus visits the Nephites and gives them an almost word-for-word version of the biblical Sermon on the Mount and teaches people how to get baptized and blesses the little kids and calls 12 apostles just like he did in the Bible. And after he dropped all the knowledge and love and blessings they could handle on them, he went back into heaven. So after Jesus left, the Nephites lived in a socialist utopia for like 200 years. But then they started getting greedy and not following the true church, and the Gadian robbers made like a serious comeback, and then the Lamanites and the Nephites got back to a total total war to the death, which kind of continued this whole cycle of the Nephites being good and then getting really rich because they're so good, and then getting kind of cocky because they're so rich, and then becoming bad because they're so cocky, and then getting thrashed by the Lamanites because they're so bad, and then becoming good again because they got thrashed. Anyway, eventually it all kind of falls apart, and the Nephites get wiped out by the Lamanites, who became what we know as Native Americans, and Mormon, who is this military leader of the Nephites and a prophet, threw together like a Cliff Notes version of his people's history on these gold plates and gave the plates to his son Moroni, who decided to throw the Jaredite story in there and write how if we prayed to ask if the Book of Mormon was true and believed hard enough while we were asking, God would make us feel like it was. Then he buried the gold plates in a stone box in a hill that was like literally right behind where Joseph Smith would live like 1500 years later. Coincidence? I don't think so. So that's the Book of Mormon. See? Good, clean family fun.
Okay, so you just can't beat Brother Jake. But get rid of him before we have another automatic continuance of YouTube. Alrighty, what do I got next? Sean McCraney. I think we'll continue this later with Sean. For now, that's our Friday early afternoon session. Mormon Truth on the Dodger Came channel. Heading out. See you in the comments. Share it if you can.